what illustrations are not useful for, and this is where I do get a little negative on illustrations, these illustrations are hypothetical projections. They are not useful for understanding the competitiveness of internal policy costs, and we'll have an example for the reasons why that is. They are not useful for understanding the reasonableness of performance expectations, and we'll have an example for that. And they're not useful for understanding the appropriateness of risk relative to the client's risk tolerance, and we'll have an example for that. These are the three things that, under proven and established best interest rules, are the three things that most influence the appropriateness of a particular product recommendation, or the determination of whether a product recommendation is actually in the client's best interest. Are costs justified? Is performance reasonable? Is risk appropriate to the client's risk profile? None of these things can be discerned from this depiction or this illustration. I do know, however, that just from experience in the business, that there was no other way to really do due diligence in the 1980s. And so I know it's a common practice, has been a common practice, to get an illustration from one insurance company or one broker and get another illustration from another insurance company or another broker and compare the premiums, and the one with the lowest premium is the one that gets recommended. So here's an example of why comparing hypothetical premiums just doesn't work in the current environment. And it has always been true, but it's never really been this untrue, or this problematic. So these illustrations, as we said earlier, these illustrations are calculated. Premiums are calculated to cover cost of insurance, charges, and expenses, assuming some particular interest rate. And in this case here, this is a real life illustration. These cash values and premiums are calculated apparently using a 5% interest rate. And so if you think about what best interest rules require: justify costs, set reasonable performance expectations, and understand risk. Well, 5% interest rate is probably a pretty conservative interest rate. It's pretty achievable. You can invest in asset classes that are not that volatile. It's conservative. That would be perfect for a client with a conservative risk profile. But if we dive deeper into this particular illustration, into these pages that are so important, that unfortunately you got to ask for more often than not. But if you dive deeper into these, what I call these detailed expense pages or policy accounting pages that show the cost of insurance charges and the expenses and the interest required to make the illustration work, or to make the policy work as expected from the illustration, this policy actually requires a 13% rate of return. This is a direct snapshot from the illustration. You can do the math yourself. $15,000 of interest on $116,000 of account value is approximately a 13% rate of return. Well, a 13% rate of return is anything but appropriate for a client with a conservative risk profile. In fact, that is a aggressive or ultra aggressive risk profile.